So let us now start this webinar today, which is on blockchain, ICT, and data for pandemic management. I am Sanjaya. I'm the head of the UNDRR Global Education and Training Institute in Incheon, Korea, and I'll be the moderator today. We have a very experienced lineup of speakers to talk about these emerging technologies. But before we start, I just wanted to mention to all the participants, as I welcome them, to use the Q&A when you want to make request a question. And at that time, please do indicate the speaker you would like to answer your question, unless it's a generic question, which is for all the panelists. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our opening speaker, Dr. Oliver Morgan. He's the Director of Health Emergency Information and Risk Assessment at the World Health Organization in the Health Emergencies Program. So Dr. Oliver Morgan, the floor is yours. Please unmute.
Thank you very much indeed, Sanjay, and thank you very much for everybody who's online. I'm delighted to open the 5th joint WHO UNDRR webinar on the lessons from COVID-19 pandemic series. I'd like to recognize the great coordination between UNDRR and WHO on these webinars capturing the lessons from the current pandemic from the all of society perspective, critical to the management of this pandemic. These webinars are also helping us to strengthen our collaboration across sectors at all levels. As of May the 25th, which is yesterday, there have been over 5.315 countries, states, and territories around the world. Tragically, 342,070 people have lost their lives. There are many aspects of the COVID, not least the rapid global spread of the virus that has impacted everybody on the planet, either directly or indirectly. But the role of data and data science in managing this pandemic has been quite remarkable and distinct from previous epidemics and pandemics. In this pandemic, we've experienced an enormous global effort to leverage data in many different ways. To track the spread of the virus, to predict where and how it will impact, to assess the effectiveness of control measures, to search for new vaccines and treatments, to keep all members of society informed, and many other applications. We will need good data to document the collective lessons that we've learned in the context of disaster risk reduction. However, the mobilization of digital efforts has brought about new challenges, such as overwhelming quantities of data, fragmentation of efforts into many small initiatives, difficulties of interpretation of data, uncertainties around some of the quality of some data, volumes of misinformation, and risks to privacy. The amazing digital resources at our disposal and available to many people around the world have not necessarily made it easier for members of our societies to determine the facts and understand what is going on. While we may be relatively early in the course of this pandemic, it is already clear that the world needs a new public health data architecture to improve our understanding of health challenges and to determine how to manage risks of such events. For example, WHO is partnering with several academic and non-profit organizations to crowdsource data from around the world to collect COVID-19 from different countries and communities. We have made these data available to everybody via WHO's website so that public health experts, statistical modelers, social anthropologists, economists, and members of the public can learn together. Building on our experience of this pandemic, we need to create a global data ecosystem that allows anyone, everywhere, to be able to easily and rapidly share information in real time without compromising privacy or confidentiality. COVID-19-related data from multiple sectors could be processed and instantly linked, creating a global web of knowledge. Imagine the things we could learn, the understanding we could gain, the impact we could have for all of us, including the most vulnerable communities. We would be able to understand the world around us like never before, glean comprehensive insights into our individual and collective risk factors and work to address them, forecast the probability of events, run robust simulations to estimate the impact of interventions, and implement prevention and mitigation measures to reduce the impact of diseases, hazards, and emergencies on economies and societies, and thus to prevent disasters in general. Imagine the unknowns that would become known, the opportunities we might create, and the lives you would save together. This vision that I've just outlined is called the EpiBrain Initiative. Under WHO's leadership, EpiBrain is working across government, academic, and private sectors to develop a flexible, distributed, connected data model for public health practice and the underlying data architecture and standards that are needed. Together, we can harness the power of data to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and strengthen disaster risk management, including the focus on emergency preparedness for timely and effective response in the future. It's a great pleasure for me to join you for this webinar, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the presentations from our speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oliver Morgan. And with this, I would like to hand over to our next speaker from the Government of Korea. He is Mr. D. Jong Lee. He's the Director of Development in the Finance Division of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Republic of Korea. Dr. D. Jong Lee, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and good afternoon, and also good evening. And thank you. It is a great pleasure and also honor to speak on the UNDRR as well as a WHO joint webinar on emerging technology in response to COVID-19. Countries around the world have been fighting against the pandemic for the past months. In Korea, the number of new cases fell to around 10 a day since the mid-April, suggesting that Korea may have passed the worst of the crisis. However, with a recent case of a mass community infection spreading around the country, as well as an imported case of a virus, we feel that it is still premature to make a judgment and also let our guard against the COVID-19. Next slide. Okay, this is a table of content. One slide back. Okay, I'd like to talk about three things and briefly go over the current status of COVID-19 in Korea. Then move on to the infection control measure of Korea using the ICTs and information data. And finally, what's the strategy and what we need to do after the COVID-19 are finished. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, although Korea is still reporting the new confirmed patients and deaths, we have successfully flattened the COVID-19 curve as the number of newly confirmed cases has remained at the double digit for the more than 40 straight days. Okay, one slide back. As of the May 25th, which is yesterday, the numbers of confirmed patients stood at 11,206, while the numbers of casualty totaled 267. Korea has worked its way into the deceleration phase of COVID-19, with the number of people being released from the quarantine every day surpassing those of a newly confirmed patient. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Next, I will talk about the infection control measure utilizing the information technology and data. Okay, thank you. With new infections still being reported, it is, as I said, it's premature for Korea to relax. However, we need to continue our effort to further contain the viral spread. Nevertheless, in response to many inquiries we received about Korea measure against pandemic, we have been sharing our tools and strategy with the interested countries and the international organization. In this respect, today I'd like to focusing on how the ICT has played a pivotal role in fighting the COVID-19 in Korea. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's fine. First, I'd like to talk about the key measure, and especially testing and treating and the tracing. And first on the testing and AI, artificial intelligence, one slide back. Yeah. AI can quickly learn, recognize, analyze large-scale data based on the high-performance computing resource. Given this feature, local government of Korea installed AI device at the medical sites, such as the public health center and the local hospital, to quickly detect abnormal finding of anomia, which is a major symptoms of a COVID-19 patient. These AI-based devices read X-ray image of patient with lung condition and to quickly accommodate patient with a severe symptom. This relieves the burden of healthcare worker and also the possible infection due to the close contact with patient, as well as improve the efficiency of diagnosis. Next on the tracing, in addition to the government has established the prompt support system for data-driven COVID-19 epidemiological investigation. After the MERS outbreak in 2015, the government has amended the law, which we call the Infection Disease Control Prevention Act, and the work with the communication company and also the credit card company to set up a system to track the transmission of infectious disease. Epidemiological investigation support team is a computer-aided system which quickly and accurately analyzes a large amount of data, such as the GPS location, mobile information, and credit card transaction. This system also operates in a very strict manner to protect the privacy with the scope of collected data kept to the minimum and follow the due procedure in acquiring, processing, and also deleting the data. After the investigation, all information will be discarded, and it cannot use any other purpose than the original purpose of the tracing. Epidemiological investigator must seek approval from the relevant authority to access the data only when there is clear need to collect the additional personal information. And third, on treating, last but definitely not the least, pharmaceutical companies in Korea are developing new medicine through the process of proposing the candidate medicine or the vaccine for COVID-19 through the deep learning algorithm program. Next slide. Next, I'd like to talk about how the digital technology has been using for the social distancing. As we all know that we cannot completely shut down the virus from the spreading, and whether you are in the Western, Eastern, or Northern or Southern Hemisphere, there is importance of social distancing in all levels, and ICTs and digital technology has been widely used and to keep the distance from the people. Advanced technology on digital method are particularly useful in spreading the key emergency information on novel virus and help to maintain the extensive social distancing. The cellular broadcasting service we call CBS enabled the government agency to transmit the emergency alert text message to cell phone without the delivery bottleneck. After they experienced a natural disaster such as the earthquake in 2016, Korean government realized the need to improve the CBS system to avoid missing out the golden time, thus enabled the local government to send a text message to their resident directly. Before that, there has been the approval process for local government to coordinate with the central government. But after 2016, the local government, without when they find that it is deemed necessary, they could send this emergency message with all people are visiting or living in the vicinity. Moreover, after the decision to postpone the beginning of the new school year on April 20, online class has begun for all students from primary to high school in Korea. The government has made effort to ensure the continuity of the education and learning by offering the online class. And this is for all grade and all, including the college student. Students have been given guidance for the self-directed learning through the e-learning content for the first 3 weeks of school closure. And the teacher managed the online classes has been offered since the 4th week. The government has secured the infrastructure for the e-learning. We call the Learning Management System, LMS, and the Education Broadcasting System, EBS, online classes. Provided guidance on the use of the private resource, such as the interactive virtual class in application. Furthermore, to bridge the learning gap of student, the disadvantaged household, the Korean government has established plans to provide the beneficiary of education grant with a digital device and the Wi-Fi connection, and the support student with a disability with the visual and the hearing impairment. So for the first time, the Korea has been successfully launching online education, not only the specific region. So this is a nationwide education from grade 1 through grade 12. Next on the data and information. Transparent disclosure of relevant data and information to public was the key and essential to tackling the pandemic. The Korean government established an official website of COVID-19 where all relevant information is available for public, including the recent outbreak and where the outbreak has been occurred. Comprehensive data such as the daily case account in the country, quarantine measure are provided and open for the immediate use for the private or also the business. These data are also utilized and repackaged by the private sector, developer, and IT company. So this information is not only available on the government side, but also readily available by the mobile application. The Korean government has adopted the 5-day location of a distribution system for the face mask to mitigate the people's growing concern about the pandemic. To provide information about the face mask in sale, the government developed with the community and the private company has been working in close contact, and we have released data on the sales of the face masks at the public retailer and the cloud company provide the cloud and the map resource need for the service development and provision. So basically, if you have a mobile phone, you can check where is the nearest location to purchase a face mask. And before you visit, you could see the inventory, how many masks are available, and where are the place those masks has been sold out, so that you do not have to make the unnecessary trip to the location. And the next slide. As the post-COVID strategy, Korea has strengthened the post-COVID related industries such as the non-face-to-face medical service, online education, and transaction. We call the untech industry. Next slide. To turn the crisis into opportunity, Korea government will push ahead with a Korean version of a New Deal as a national project to create the job and promote the resilience of the economy. Korean New Deal focusing on the transformation into digital economy and industry, accelerated by the COVID-19, along with the job creation, as well as the innovation in the digital economy. The government will work on large-scale projects to promote the digital economy, seeking the synergy with the private sector investment and the improvement in the industrial productivity and overall competitiveness of the national industry. Moreover, the government will work on the 10 specific goals to speed up transportation into the digital economy, which includes building infrastructure for the digital economy, such as big data and the remote, the untech business, also improving the existing infrastructure project with the digitalization. Specific plan will be unveiled by the government in next month. Next slide. Finally, I'd like to conclude my statement. COVID-19 is an unprecedented crisis, and it calls for the unprecedented solution and response. COVID-19 demonstrates the vital role of ICTs and the data information more than ever before. ICT and information has not only helped the enhance control measure and response measure so far, but it would also be the key to tackle the preparing the future pandemic, and also the preparing for the world unveiled by after the COVID-19. In this sense, COVID-19 is indeed the wake-up call for the importance of digitalization and information, and also the global cooperation and solidarity. In that sense, Korea will work in the close cooperation, and also we're willing to to share and also the information we gather during and after the COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dae-Jong Lee. Very interesting presentation. Now, I would like to hand over to Ms. Michelle Chivunga. She's the founder, CEO of the Global Policy House, which is based in UK, and is working with governments around the world, helping them to understand the use of blockchain technology for their various functions. And she's going to talk about how blockchain can help in the pandemic management. So Michelle, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll just wait if I could get as a way to get the slides up. Thank you so much. Firstly, I really would like to take this opportunity to wish everybody well. I know this is a very, very difficult and challenging time for everybody across the world. What we're facing is a major crisis in different respects. Of course, we know we're looking at a health crisis, but we're also facing, a challenge around sort of economic crisis, and you're looking at, many, many challenges across the world. I also take the opportunity now to also thank the United Nations for giving me this opportunity to address you and talk a little bit more around, what solutions we can actually implement. Certainly the technological, revolution is very much here. The fourth industrial revolution is bringing to us, to the forefront a range of different emerging technologies that can play a very, very critical role around the pandemic. And I will share just a couple of slides around how we can kind of try to mitigate the situation by leveraging technology and using technology to actually benefit all. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, I mean, some of the technology solutions that we have been implemented across the world are vast. Many countries have been looking at different packages and offers, as you've heard already. Certainly in places like Singapore, the government is, its open data has been a core element in terms of designing packages to address the pandemic, mapping out, using data to map out, the outbreak and trying to mitigate against the outbreak by using data, using robots, using a whole range of different technologies. In China, where the virus emerged last year, robots have been used, for example, for disinfecting hospitals, using ultraviolet light, drones are delivering medical supply, and AI is being used to sort scans to spot infection. So there are a whole range of measures are being implemented. In Canada, in Africa, new innovations are also being created to try and mitigate against the virus. Next slide, please. It's a little bit slow in terms of loading, thank you. And when you're talking about, the road to recovery really, encompasses so many things. Technology is one of them, certainly. But the road to recovery is very much around us working together in collaboration. The virus itself has had no selection, has impacted every corner of the world, regardless of what state of development, countries are. And it is absolutely important that we start to look at how do we look at, mitigating against the virus? How do we use technology? How do we leverage technology? And how we drive new innovation that can support, around catastrophes. So the road to recovery encompasses a range of things. And what I'm going to touch up today is very much only, a minimum offer. And we need to look at the fuller package as we move on. Next slide, please. Indeed, different sectors, as the slide uploads, you will see, but indeed, different sectors have been impacted very, very differently. Obviously the tourism and hospitality sectors have been hit very, very hard across the world. The airline industry could lose up to 113 billion, in 2020 alone, which is drastic. But when you start to look at technology and you look at things like what does the future look like around this? What can we use to help mitigate? In the tourism industry, for example, you look at virtual reality, how do you start to, be innovative around how we promote tourism, how we engage with tourism? You can look at virtual reality and a whole range of other things. Communication is another area where there's been massive impact. Pharmaceutical and medical equipment has been a major challenge in terms of sourcing and kind of establishing where these equipments are. So again, a major area has been impacted there. Next slide, please. As we wait for the slides to upload, some of the challenges I think that we are seeing, are spread across different sectors. And if you look at, areas like, for example, agriculture and a whole range of other, areas is very, very challenging. So when you're looking at, development around agribusiness, for example, very, very difficult. And one of the, solutions around this is actually data. So how do we start to look at data points that can help to reduce, for example, misinformation around what is happening with COVID? How do we look at, supporting things like, producing agricultural packages that match different local economies, for example? Governments have been impacted quite heavily as well in terms of obviously managing, budgets and trying to mitigate and bring stimulus, packages into place. Issues around food security, especially in developing country, huge area. Education, schools closed, difficulties around, managing, grading and children moving from one level to the next. How do you mitigate against that? When you're looking at public health as well, the challenges have been severe around public health. In fact, COVID has actually showcased how challenging it is in terms of public health systems, and the systems themselves are not fully developed, and it's very, very clear that COVID has highlighted that very, very significantly. When you're looking at, business sectors as well, it's time for businesses, I think, to reevaluate their business model offerings at the moment. A lot of businesses have struggled, a lot of businesses have closed. The SME, sector, my sector, has been hit very, very hard. And it's very, very important, I think, we start to look at what are the solutions for these particular sectors. What can we look at driving in terms of supporting these sectors to move from not necessarily just into recovery, but into sustainable recovery, which is absolutely fundamental. Next slide, please. So now I would dwell into, a bit more around the technologies themselves. So global responses, tech solutions, how do we create tech solutions, but how do we create a green world? A world that is sustainable, a world that, is facilitated by green financing, a world that, encapsulates, support for all members of that society. Obviously, technology is going to play a critical role. AI in terms of predictive analysis, analytics that you've already heard about is pretty powerful. AI is going to touch almost every part of our lives. How do we start to use the technologies, tracking patients to avoid, spreading the virus, IoT, wearables, and sensors to detect, for example, body temperatures, or certainly temperatures of trucks that are moving goods and services from A to B. How do we start to leverage these technologies? Robotics, again, huge opportunities around, autonomous, disinfection, chat boxes to share information, support around mental health. This is a really, really important point. As we're heading, I mentioned that it's not just necessarily a pandemic or health crisis. We are also looming into a mental health crisis as people find themselves difficult to adjust and shift from one situation to another where they're quite used to living in a certain way. So how do we help mitigate? How does technology help and connect? Of course, blockchain. Blockchain has a massive role to play, and I will shed a bit more light, a bit more deep dive into blockchain as we move into the next slide, please. But before I carry on around as the slides are uploaded, because it's quite slow from my end, but before I delve into blockchain, I think the underlying ingredient or the hot sauce that you need for blockchain or any of these other technologies I've highlighted is very much around data. We've already heard around the importance of data, but we have to be very, very clear. Data quality is important. So how you treat your data, I think, is important. We have to be nice to data. I think we have to look for data that's going to actually give us some valuable information or analytics that can help us to, design products and services, goods and services that can actually be relevant for the marketplace. So it's important to look at things like data quality, data management. How do you govern, the usage of data as well? Very, very important debate that is ongoing at the moment. How do you manage data? But also equally so, when you look at the whole data infrastructure, the whole data environment, we have to look at skills, for example, and how do you look into data science? How do we analyze data? How do the human element come in and support around data management? So data is very much at the heart. And master data is actually the ones that we need to be so focused on. People say data is the new oil. Yes, but quality data. We don't want dirty oil. You need quality data. You need clean data that you can use to analyze and inform your decisions, just as we heard from the government and the ministry earlier on. Next slide, please. And of course, you need to, by using data and leveraging data, you can optimize either your business value chains or your global value chains, to make more productive sales with that. Next slide. So we live in a data-driven world for sure. And increasingly, leaning towards a model where greater transparency is sought around data. Who owns the data? In other words, do I decide how, what, when, where my data is being utilized? What are the governance structures as I outlined the area? How do we look at blockchain data management itself? Is it more secure? Is it not? Utilization of data is critical and should come with clear understanding of data storage. Management principles for data and data optimization, as I mentioned earlier on. And putting it very, very simply, I think data is a valuable resource that must be managed efficiently, to benefit what the data is actually telling us. And I think the key or the goal or the, what you're actually trying to source from the data is what is really, really important, and will form a lot of decisions, business decisions, policy-making decisions, as well as decisions when we're developing different protocols, as I'll discuss later on. So, there has been a slow response. The next slide. There has been a, in terms of looking at data regulation and, data localization laws, there hasn't been that much of a speedy response around it. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. You know, as we migrate into digital platforms, a whole range of different varying digital platforms, it's very important that we have those data sources. And we also have that frank conversations about data privacy. You know, who is owning the data? At the moment, you have a huge number of, huge organizations, large organizations, managing and owning data. But of course, there are solutions in place. You know, we have blockchain-based products at the moment that allows you to control your data. Next slide, please. So, as I highlighted in summary, you know, huge range of different technology. 3D printing has been used to print masks and a whole range of other different COVID-19, equipment. Internet of Things in terms of that connector, you know, that connector that shares data into different devices to inform as well is very, very key. Artificial intelligence, which, as I said earlier on, is there for us, you know, to help to guide us and read through the trends, give us some trends, give us some analysis in order to inform what we're doing. Quantum computing, I get very, very excited about quantum computing. You know, superpower computers that are coming into force. Are we investing enough money to learn a bit more about what quantum can do? And, you know, when we transition, you know, and we are transitioning, we're going to have to transition. The new norm, is going to be the norm we create. So it's important we transition, and we help to that transition and ease that transition by leveraging these technologies that are here. Big data and usage of, you know, large amounts of data, collection of data, especially for governments, pretty critical. Start to manage your data, start to look at those big data, platforms that can help you and leverage those. Next slide, please. Blockchain solutions. A very, very important areas. Now, when you're looking at blockchain has been a love of mine for quite, it feels like a very long time. But blockchain is a subject area that, you know, is very, very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to grasp and to understand. I hope, you know, the developers who are on this call don't mind me being a little bit more simplistic and without going into too much technical details. But blockchain, for me, how I like to think of it is very much a digital book of records, you know, of transactions that are chained together, hence the name blockchain. And in each of those blocks, you have, data that is in the blocks. It's also a bit like, you know, when you have a Lego game, for example, and you're trying to put your Legos together for children, you have to match the right Lego or the right puzzle in place. And blockchain kind of, you know, works a little bit like that, where the actual puzzle has to match with the next one. So very, very important. Now, there's certain qualities or characteristics of blockchain that make it pretty special. You know, when you're looking at time-stamped, transactions in real time, you know, very securely stored information onto the blockchain, which is very, very hard to change and manipulate. Again, very, very important in terms of tamper-proof evidence. When you're looking at, opportunities for resilience and creation of trust, especially trust. You know, at the moment, COVID-19 has very much shed a light around the lack of trust, especially in supply chains. When you're doing business with this person or that person, you don't know, do I trust them, do I not? How long is it going to take for me to get my document from A to B? There's a lack of trust in the system. If there's one thing that blockchain really helps with, is that trust, creating trust because of, the security that is behind blockchain and the transactions behind blockchain. So in summary, you know, blockchain transactions are made of blocks of data. Blocks of data are linked together. Blockchain is an underlying technology as well that has produced, digital currencies like Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency. So blockchain is not the same as cryptocurrency. Now, moving to the next slide, I thought I'd put this up, you know, to just give you a little bit of a summary in terms of how blockchain actually work. You know, and here you can see from the visual, you know, when you put in a transaction, it is broadcasted to what we call a peer-to-peer network. And that network consists of different nodes or computers. Nodes are computers, you know, and all those computers have to actually, gain consensus and agree on the transactions before those transactions are verified. And when those transactions are verified, they're added to the next chain of blocks, if you like, and created a transaction. But don't worry so much about, you know, understanding the technical, the background behind blockchain. I think what you really key is actually understanding what does blockchain produce? How do you use it? How do you leverage it? Next slide. And one of the ways that you can leverage blockchain, as you can see here, what I've called the kind of blockchain for COVID-19. You know, when you're looking at testing, for example, and you're looking at patient registration, and combining all those together into a decentralized platform where information can be shared, especially for governments, researchers, medical practitioners, and how they can use that data to inform and design new solutions and products is really, really important. And that visual gives you a little bit of an example of how the technology itself actually works in the context of COVID-19. So a real-time, seamless, multi-party coordination between healthcare professionals and an ideal infrastructure from an end-to-end COVID-19 patient management system. So blockchain is, is the only enabler, I think, at the moment that is kind of designed that way, that can help to implement, in short times, connecting to existing off-chain government database to get that data and to share that data and to, inform that data. And of course, using to track and trace on a whole range of things, as we've heard earlier on. Next slide. So there's a whole range of organizations working on different, COVID-19 solutions, which are blockchain based. So this is a whole range of different, companies and groups that are looking at COVID-19 using blockchain and AI at sometimes. Ourselves, at the Global Policy House, we've also just recently teamed up with a range of different organizations and have been supported by the UK government, to bring in, for example, community testing apps, but also looking at community testing engagement platforms. And also looking at education. For us, education is very, very key. So one of the things we have designed is obviously online learning, catered for different markets, as I'll explain later on. It's very, very important. I think we focus around that. But some of the solution, Civitas, an app aims to improve safety and cut, waiting times to reduce gatherings in tight places, hence minimizing the spread. The university as well, looking at different platforms, utilizing blockchain, artificial intelligence, IoT, to help medical facilities track coronavirus cases globally. The system uses private blockchain. You can have private blockchain where certain people can only have access to that blockchain, or open source blockchain as well, which is being implemented by different groups. You're looking at a whole range. So all these different organizations are offering different platforms as well. Next slide, thank you. And in terms of education, the next slide really clearly, exemplifies why we put such an emphasis around education and around building skills. If there's one thing that has come out very, very strongly is education and online platforms. How do we start to educate the next level, leaders, and people, women, businesses as well to drive and grow as well. Very, very important for us, and we are very much working on that as well. Next slide, supply chain. Certainly, I have highlighted very strongly earlier on in terms of the importance of supply chain. In order to mitigate against the pandemic, we need to create trust in supply chains. We need to boost global value chains. And how do we do that? Obviously, leveraging technology through its characteristics of trust, creating trust, transparency within the supply chains. Because of that, you can see the same record, the same copy of the book or ledger, that digital book that is shared across different players. As you know, in trade, there are many, many players, and it's very, very cumbersome business and very, very hard to track and monitor what's happening and when. Particularly relevant for SMEs as well, who are very much part of those value chains. Very, very important that that same digital book is obviously used to optimize, using the data and to optimize the data so that we can provide services that are more efficient for them, to help them in terms of creating opportunities as well. Then, of course, the delivery of goods and services to cities is very, very critical. And this is something I think all governments should focus on. How do we ensure that speedy delivery? How do we open up our supply chains? How do we use technology to digitize documentation? How do we use technology to enable better communications with players? Very, very important. Boosting trade and encouraging that digital trade to stimulate activity in the economy, even in the local economies, is absolutely fundamental. Next slide, please. And this just, I took this to just exemplify to you the sort of the number of documentation that you have to go through, for example, trade process, many, layers and layers of documentation, and you can imagine the sort of the inefficiencies around this, the lack of coordinations, the problems and challenges maybe in different areas, be it from importer to exporter, to the shipper, and what happens at each stage of that. We need to digitize end to end, not necessarily just one element of that whole value chain, but to digitize end to end in order to see the benefits. Next slide. So what solutions have we actually got in place? Where else is blockchain relevant? Blockchain is relevant in so many different areas and can be utilized for a number of things, apart from just looking at things like supply chain and opening up the supply chain. but you also can use blockchain, for example, for cost savings around, we have new innovations coming in, decentralized finance coming in. We have central bank digital currencies that are being explored at the moment. And of course, central bank or digital cash isn't necessarily new. This existed from, the early 80s, 90s. But there's certain massive opportunities in terms of that decentralization of currency, which I think will be beneficial for many groups. Including, sort of the banking systems as well. When you're looking at things, sort of settlements, intra-bank relationship, and trying to manage those, there's decentralization, and also the security that comes with blockchain can help with that. And then the transparency factors as well helps to actually understand where, you're at in terms of your services and products that you're offering to your customers, which again is very, very important. Next slide, please. Thank you. And in sort of just jumping back to pharmaceutical supply chain, because this really exemplifies what I was talking about around supply chain. So pharmaceutical supply chain is very, very clouded at the moment, as you can see from that picture. Difficult, for people to kind of have a clear perspective in terms of where their medication is coming from, for example. How do you track that? How do you monitor that? Blockchain can certainly help with that. And then how do you look at, gathering the players together, those nodes or those computers, so all the actors within sort of the pharmaceutical industry. Very important to connect them, and using the technology also be a platform for them to interact and connect, which is really, really key as well. Next slide, please. Now, people can participate, obviously, in I think the benefits of healthcare, again, looking at a blockchain is how you start to empower people within the sort of healthcare ecosystem. So even me, myself as a patient, if I want to understand how my information or my data around my healthcare is being utilized, I can choose and decide by platforms that have been built and developed to do this. So how do we go about supporting that? How does technology, how does blockchain help with that? Obviously, you've got all the different players. It offers higher security and transparency, and then allows for that data that is collected, that is put securely onto the blockchain, which cannot be manipulated very, very easily, can help, professionals, healthcare professionals to look at the data sets and use technologies like AI to read the data sets and support in terms of developing solutions or issues around it. Next slide, please. So where else can you use blockchain? Again, government. I think we have a very strong government audience here with us today. There are numerous, use cases that are going on. Very few live, I think, but we are moving towards, improving that. But of course, land registration and ensuring, I mean, in economies, in a lot of our kind of developing economies, there's a lot of issues that come up with around land ownership, and all that. How do you ensure that land belongs to Michelle? By providing that sort of digital identity and placing that land into the blockchain actually can help to solve that problem and mitigate against other issues that come to fore. Voting systems have been trialed in places like Sierra Leone. Healthcare management I've talked about extensively. And of course, supply chain management is huge. Education, validating, how do you ensure those, masters, those courses are validated? How do you ensure that the accreditations that are given are validated? How do I go to an employer and convince that employer that what I'm presenting him is actually accurate? You can use a blockchain to do that. But of course, also around corruption and reducing fraud, fraudulent activity is very, very key. Securing interconnected government services, I think, is very, very important one. Where governments work in different departments and they have different ministries, how do you communicate with each other securely? And not breaching sort of privacy, but we want to share that transparency with your fellow different departments. Very, very important, and blockchain can help that. And then of course, high level identity management. Millions and millions of people today still have no identity. Hence they're, closed out of the financial system and cannot play within the financial system. We need to improve ID systems in place. Next slide. And of course, here just exemplifies some of the technologies and where they're used in the respects of COVID management. You have sort of outbreak estimation with AI. Again, you're reading, using AI to read that vaccination development and what that looks like. You're looking at prediction in terms of future outbreaks as well. Blockchain functionality is a whole range of them, obviously depending on the protocols or the base that which the blockchain is developed on. You're looking at outbreak tracking, user privacy protection, and a whole range of other things. But at the core of it, underneath it all, as I said earlier on, is very much around data and the quality of data that you have. Next slide, please. And this is really just to exemplify to you that indeed, blockchain is just a tool, it's an enabler, but it should be that enabler that encompasses, and drives towards creating those sustainable cities. And it doesn't work in isolation. So blockchain very much works very, very well, as I've highlighted already, with things like AI and IoT and a whole range of other things. And we want to create that circular economy. Here, I've just kind of tried to highlight to you how you can create that circular economy, that green economy, using technologies. So for example, sustainable agriculture and land use we've talked about, open doors for sustainable green finance by being that transparent and sharing that information, that same copy of the truth to different parties and sharing that information. Allows smart recycling through decentralized platforms, allows electric energy platforms through decentralized platforms that helps to improve efficiency and optimize business models, as I say, and provide sustainable healthcare, very, very important, and allow smart transportation as well. Next slide, please. Here again, I have just in the next couple of slides, we just highlighted a couple of organizations in different parts of the world that are using blockchain and other technologies to enable them to deliver what they need to deliver. Safe Hands is working to use existing tech-enabled supply chains to hand out things like sanitizers and a whole range of other things. Nemidex ecosystem technologies in Nigeria, again, using geolocation for contact tracing. At the heart of this, with obviously the free trade area agreement, put in place, I think Africa is very well positioned to leverage technology, to leapfrog, without the issues around sort of legacy systems, and use these technologies to actually advance interregional trade, engagement globally as well. So very, very important. These organizations, these startups, and a whole range of other groups that are highlighted here will play a very critical role around that. And certainly, again, just highlighting yesterday was Africa Day. There's a lot of momentum around driving Africa forwards. In the African Union and a whole range of other organizations are working tirelessly to do that. Africa is actually predicted to have about 6 million job losses as a result of COVID. I think if there's one continent where we can actually start to leverage technology fully, then it definitely is Africa. And there are massive, massive opportunities around driving growth, around, supporting healthcare, education, and our startups and SMEs are very much doing that. Another example here is a virtual reality group, who are using virtual reality and augmented reality to look at conference and events management. So board meetings where you don't have to physically go in and meet people anymore. You can use the virtual reality to do that. Very, very exciting, and really credit to them for that. Next slide, please. States as well, lots of activity, a lot more around sort of liquidity packages that are being offered. But again, bringing in blockchain, how can we utilize blockchain, for example, to manage the share of liquidity, the disbursement of funds, those stimulus packages that I talked about, and how do you ensure that, this amount of money that's shipped to this country or this money that's shared here, how do we ensure there's transparency and visibility on how that funding is used? How do we ensure that it's reaching the SMEs? How do we ensure that it's actually making an impact? Again, technology, blockchain can play a critical role, and we should leverage that as well. Next slide. Across Europe, again, massive, jointed efforts around different countries coming together and developing solutions and looking for ways using Bluetooth and a whole range of other technologies to mitigate against the impact. Our recommendations. I've obviously kind of run through those slides very, very quickly. Each of those technologies has a very, very critical role to play. I think, in terms of really sort of transforming, looking at transformation, I certainly think, blockchain is one of those technologies. Blockchain and AI and IoT possibly, working together is a solution and remedy for, a long-term solution around, some of the tech solutions that we're looking at. So for us, in terms of recommendations for the world, really, it's very much about, jointedness, but it's also about, learning to prepare, protect, and preserve. When we're looking at, see the slides are slightly different, but I'll talk to the one that I've got. But when you're looking at, some of the important recommendations, this applies to all countries across the world. It's important to identify, to learn, and invest in technology. The digital revolution has been, in existence for a little while. It's taken some time. It's actually taken COVID for countries to wake up to say, actually, we need to pay attention to the digital side. We need to skill up people. We need to be able to skill up people so that they can actually, have an understanding of how technologies work. And if they're working in other fields where, automation is taking over. We need to reskill those people so they can move into different jobs. We need to invest in strengthening our digital economy. The digital economy, for me, sits side by side with the traditional economy. We need to look at industrialization, as a whole. How do we start growing these economies? How do we actually start investing in digital economy to help us fuel activity in other parts of the economy, and a whole range of other areas? Invest in talent, unite nations so that they can collaborate. And finally, I leave you with a present from Africa. In Africa, we have this concept of Ubuntu. It's very, very important that, I am because we are all in this together. We all have to find solutions together. We all have to work together in order for us to resolve what is happening with COVID and what happens post-COVID. So we have other major health crises. We've got other major, climate crises and a whole range of other challenges that we're facing. I think it is important that we remain united. I think it is important that we work together. And I think it's important we don't become, too protectionist around things, and we start to open up our borders, but also open up our hearts. And that's what the concept of Ubuntu stands for. So when you're thinking about sort of wealth and value creation, it's for all of us to benefit. We must all be able to, reap that little bit of wealth. We must be able to also access that Ubuntu gold. We must be able to access that those Ubuntu value chains, Ubuntu, trade, and all range of other things. So it's about humanity. But also humanity has to be aware about what else is around humanity, including our environment and our climate and a whole range of things. Technology is one part of the answer. We are here to support you, in terms of our technology offer, and we have many, many solutions and many, many players. We work in partnership with a whole range of different groups, as I've highlighted, and we're really, really here to help. Thank you very much. Again, thank you to the UN for giving me this opportunity to address you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I have a few questions. Many have been answered, but there is one question. I think it would be best answered by you. How can issue of donations on COVID be handled by governments to guarantee that the aid reaches the destination? So maybe it's about managing managing the incoming. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A great question as well. I mean, it's a bit like some of the conversations we've had around, for example, aid. We've had a history of, aid disbursement, which hasn't really made that massive impact in terms of transformation, economic transformation. So how do you handle those donations? I think, again, looking at blockchain technology, if you're placing, you have multiplayer, many people engaged, which you would have in terms of donations. You want to be able to track and see how that is spent. And using the technology, which again allows you, for that traceability, the tracking, and to see the provenance of where those donations are actually coming from. You can manage that on the blockchain. It's very, very visible. So even in terms of real time, if I donate today and I want to see where my donations are going, that is possible. We can actually make that possible by designing a platform that allows to do that. And I want to be able to say, okay, my donation has reached this person in another country. To that degree, I think you can use blockchain technology to monitor and see how that's going. But also importantly as well, when you're putting all that information or that data about the donations onto the blockchain, you have other players who might want to look at that information. You can either decide to make it a private blockchain, for example, where you have only, the donors as well as the people who receive it, to kind of be the only ones that are in that private network that can, have decisions around what happens with the donations. But also it gives a, good basis for kind of data management, as I was saying earlier on. So analyzing that data without necessarily sharing any personal, sensitive information, and analyzing that data to look at trends about how do people donate? How can we incentivize people to donate? You can go into deeper into things like, tokenomics and a whole range of other things to incentivize people to donate. But then again, that's a topic for another subject. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you. And there is another question. Blockchains create by design an unalterable data record. How can this be made compatible with privacy and limited data retention?
Sure. I think, like here in Europe, of course, you've got the GDPR and a whole range of other, other laws that are kind of implemented in countries, and of course countries are very much looking at privacy. As I said earlier on, the privacy argument is a valid and a big one as well. But how can you ensure? I think it's very, very important to, again, for the transparency. So with GDPR, you can kind of choose and select, should have the options, I think, to choose and select how your data, for example, is utilized. But once you put information on the blockchain, it is very, very difficult to get it out. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of what you actually put onto the blockchain. Back to my first slide around, what quality data are you actually sharing? Quality to who? So if I'm sharing my personal information, I don't want the world to know about it. It might be really, really silly, for example, to put that information into an open blockchain, for example. But if it is going to kind of help with things like, pandemics and looking at healthcare to change, to look at curing cancer and a whole range of other things, then I might have a different way or different approach. So I think communication with the users is very important in terms of when you're designing these protocols. So before you even go and bring in, blockchain platforms or other protocols, important to have the end user in mind. And very much kind of pay attention to, people as well. And of course, behaviors are going to shape certain things. Privacy is always going to be a big debate. And there's always a thin line between sort of privacy and, and ensuring you're using the data to inform and do a range of things as well.
Okay, thank you. I think many questions were already answered by your colleagues on the Q&A session. But just one question for Mr. Lee. There was a query about this, how to ensure internet connectivity with all the households. So what has the Korean government done to promote the internet connectivity with all the households? Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for the connection. I think for the distance education, and this is first time that we have used it, and that Korea is luckily that one of the most connected country. And however, it does not mean we have a 100% for all household. It does not mean that all the household has PCs and internet connection. So what we did was we have also utilized with some donation, as well as the government provided low-income people with a PC, and I think this is a help. So basically, that currently moment, all the student or young people and that are eligible for the grade 1 to 12 have access for the e-learning or the distance education, and we either support with the actual PCs and the laptop, or we have provide the center where they could get access for the internet and also the remote education.
Thank you. We have some more questions left, but we have run out of time. So what we will do is we will compile these. There are 6 open questions. We will compile and share with the speakers and provide written answers to those who have asked these questions. So in due course, we will also be sharing the PowerPoint. We will share that link with you. So with this, I would like to thank the 2 speakers, Michelle and Mr. Lee, and hand over to Dr. Oliver Morgan for closing remarks. Oliver, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, and thank you so much to our 2 presenters for giving us some excellent presentations and great insights. I think the discussion really did show how blockchain, ICT, and data science in general have been key parts of our response to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic in many sectors and at many different levels. It's really motivating for me to know how COVID-19 is really accelerating the adaptation of many different aspects of data science and information technology. And it's also bringing about new alliances and innovations that have launched us forwards in this unprecedented time. Data and data science are crucial to enhancing preparedness for COVID-19 and to also strengthen health security more broadly. Collecting and sharing data is an integral part of the international health regulations, which encourage countries to work together to prevent, detect, notify, and respond to outbreaks. At WHO, we're looking forward to our continued engagement with experts and communities around the world to further develop how our data world can help us contribute to the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. You can find daily updates and technical guidance about COVID-19 on the WHO website, and more information about the EpiBrain initiative at epi-brain.com. I would like to also thank our webinar organizers, colleagues and friends from the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, as well as my WHO colleagues from the Disaster Risk Management and Resilience team. Thank you everybody for participating. Have a great afternoon, a good morning, or a good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. And with this, this session comes to an close. We will, as I mentioned, have the remaining questions answered by Michelle in due course. She will be, we will share with you the answers. And with this, this webinar is over. So thank you all again.